what you're looking for when you install this is that that bead isn't high, that it might be on, but it sits high, or super low. You want it to be relatively even all the way around. So after I put 15 pounds in, I'll look at that bead line all the way around and see, are there any spots where the tire is dipped way down or sticking way out. Dipped way down is not nearly as big a problem as sticking out. If it's up above and you keep inflating it, the tire's going to come off the wheel and explode. So we have to make sure that bead is even. If it's not, if you have too much air in the tube, you might not be able to manipulate it. You might have to let a little bit of air out. Then you can kind of manipulate it around and make sure, don't let it get flat, but you get just enough air where you can move the bead so that you're smooth all the way around. Then I'll go and I'll put another 15 or 20 pounds in and I'll check it again. So now we're at 30 pounds. So I'll just give it a quick eyeball test. Make sure that side looks good. Make sure that side looks good. If I'm at 30 and it still isn't coming off, most of the time I can go to pressure. So for this particular tire, that's 65 if I go to max. And in case you're interested, we even have these cool, fully digital pumps.
Easy to read.
So it tells you how much air is in there.
The other ones will be a dial, and it will just, you'll find.
These are cooler, but they cost a lot.
And if you're using an emergency frame one, it may not have a gauge at all. So that's when you'll hopefully have a tire gauge with you.
And sometimes when you have that pump and you don't have a tire gauge, you just have to
use
realize
the
it's an
wheel.
emergency situation. I got to get enough air to get home. You're doing a squeeze test. Do I have enough air? Put your valve cap back on.
I guess it's not
Reinstall your wheel.
Everything we did with the quick release, we're just doing in an opposite way. So the brakes open so that we can get the fully inflated tire in. You're getting it on the axle here, so you just gotta kind of, a lot of times if your bike's upside down, it just kind of falls in with gravity. So you're getting it all the way, just a little more, like that. And with it on the stand, gravity's fighting me right now, but you're gonna hook your brake up by doing the opposite. So you're gonna get that little, this one's pink, isn't always, but you're gonna get that little piece in, and make sure it pops in all the way. So now your brake is hooked back up. Then you're gonna come down here. You're not gonna turn the lever, you're gonna hold the lever side and turn the nut towards you. You're gonna occasionally, you can see, let me loosen this up a little bit. Can you see how floppy this is? You wanna turn the nut towards you, occasionally flick it up. You should get a good amount of tension about halfway up. You don't want it too hard. You want it just a little bit of effort. Like I can easily do it with one hand, but if I could use my fingers, it's not enough. And if I have to like use my muscles, it's way too much. So just like that. The one thing before you fully flip that up, which answers your question with the brake adjustment, you can see, kind of, but you can see I can move the wheel to either side and it hits the brake pads left or right. Most kind of center themselves, but before I flip that all the way up, I just want to eyeball and make sure it's not hitting one of the brake levers, or brake pads, more than the other. If it is, just gently scoot it a little bit and then flip it and make sure the wheel's not rubbing. If it was, then I would just flip this down and recenter it.
So if we don't have a quick release,
You have an axle wrench, or an axle nut with a wrench. then it's going to work the same way.
tightening.
Okay, you would adjust it the same way too, or is it
Well,
gonna just
I'm gonna show you guys a little trick. I'll take the bike out of the stand for a minute, because you're probably doing this out on the road, not on a stand. And this will work whether you have a nutted axle or whether you have a quick release. If it's a nutted axle, your axle nuts would just be loose. This is the only, well, just think of it that way. When this lever is open, your axle nuts are loose, okay? So, one of the common complaints that we might see in the shop is somebody will bring a bike in for a new tube, and then we'll change the tube and we'll put the wheel back in and we'll wheel the bike back up, and they'll say, my brakes weren't rubbing when I brought it in. Well, if your brakes weren't rubbing when you brought it in, then they weren't adjusted properly if they're rubbing now. What it is she showed you've got the movement side to side here. Most forks today, most modern bikes, there's been lawsuits over the years because of quick release wheels. So they've come up with a system that keeps the wheel secure even if this isn't tight. And that is recessed fork mount dropouts. So these nuts fit inside those recesses and it won't let it come off if they're not tight. Now, if I adjust this brake when the wheel is completely all the way in the fork and centered in the fork, if I adjust the brake to center for that, the brake is that's where it's gonna be set at. Now, if I mount the wheel slightly off center and lock it, now the wheel will rub. Because the brakes are set to center. The wheel now is not centered. So the easiest trick is with that loose, where we have this, push down on the handlebar stem, or if you're not able to do that, push down on your fork. It's easiest the handlebar stem. Push down on the handlebar stem, and then lock this in place, because now the wheel is all the way up in the fork. So your brakes should, if they're adjusted properly, not rub. So once you put it back on, that's the easiest thing. Just that's open, push down hard here, and this quick release screw is a little too loose.
And you want the lever is up. Don't lock it so it's down, upside down, because it's a stick or something to catch on it.
Yeah. When you put it back on, usually we try to run it parallel with the fork. If you put it this way, and you're riding, let's say, in a bike path that's overgrown or out in the woods or something, you can catch something there and that can flip open. So if you put it this way, that won't happen. Questions? Everybody good? Makes sense? So you're just going to tighten your axle nuts when you push down, if you have axle nuts on the front while you're pushing down.
On each side, right?
What's that?
On both sides?
Yes. Yeah, you don't have three hands, so you're going to do one side, get it snug, and the other side, get it snug, and then kind of come back while you're pushing.
And your disc brakes work the exact same. You're just not opening this. You're doing the foot release. Foot down, turning right, the wheel comes out of the caliper here. This rotor fits in between here.
Oh, okay.
You just don't have this part.
Okay. Do your absolute best not to touch a rotor if you have disc
Yeah.
brakes, because your fingers have oils in them, and that will contaminate the disc and make your brakes not work well.
And the sharp. And try not to squeeze your brake lever, especially with hydraulic disc brakes when the wheel's off. 'Cause
Okay.
it kind of moves everything.
Does anybody have disc brake? Do you have hydraulics?
Yes.
The problem with hydraulics, if you squeeze it, is it will take, there's a piston on each side. This one doesn't have pistons. On the hydraulic one, there's a piston on each side that pushes the brake shoes and then releases. And it sets itself, once it makes contact, it sets itself how far it's going to come back. So as your disc wears and your shoes wear, it's slowly setting itself tighter. So that your brake tends to still feel the same. If there's no disc in there, it goes this way, and it only opens up a tiny little bit, and you can't put your wheel back in. So don't squeeze a hydraulic disc brake without a disc in it. Otherwise, you're going to be grumpy.
There's no need to. Sometimes if you're putting it in and out of the car and take your wheel off, it might get snagged on something. So they make little spacers you can put in there for that occasion.
Or sometimes you'll have your bike in a car rack that requires the front wheel off, And I don't know if you're around the shop, you see it all the time. When somebody looks at a bike, the first thing they do is squeeze the brake lever. If somebody's checking your bike out and it's in a car rack that the wheel is off, that's one of the first things they're going to do is squeeze the brake lever. So they make little blocks that'll slide in to simulate a disc.
So not to take a lot of time, say if I did that, what would I do then?
It depends. Sometimes I have a tool that sometimes works. I can put it in between those two shoes and I can slowly work that back out. It doesn't work often, but it does work sometimes. Usually it means a new brake bleed. You have to bleed the brakes. You have to release the pressure with the bleed screw, push the pistons out, remove the brake shoes, put a bleed block in, and then push fluid back through the whole system, get all the air out. It's a pain. And it's going to cost you about,
You have to
it's
have the bleed kit to do it.
going to cost you about $30.
Okay, that's good to know.
For the kit or for you guys to do it?
For us to do it.
Okay.
I think the kit probably would cost you about $30 too. The skills required to bleed it,
Just bring it in.
unless you're bleeding regularly, it's probably not worth it. It's something that it's not like it's much harder than bleeding brakes on a car. It really is. I don't know why it's that way, but it is. You can bleed brakes on a car like that, but on a bike, if you don't have the right equipment, you can be there for an hour and a half. It's a real challenge sometimes. We're not going to go through the whole removal and reinstallation of the tire, but I'm going to show you how to take the wheel off. And you kind of feel like the brake works the same way, whether it's a disc brake or whether it's a caliper brake. You have to disconnect your brake in order to pass your wheel through the brake shoes. So, as she did on the front, we're going to disconnect the brake here. Most of you guys probably have this style of brake that's called linear pull. It's the most common brake system on the market now and has been for about 15 years. If you don't have that style, do you have that style? You kind of shook your head.
No, I don't think
Is your
so.
bike here?
Ours goes down, yeah.
Okay, I'll take a look and we'll see.
I have brake issues, so I was going to talk to you about it
Okay.
anyways.
So once this is disconnected, it's very similar to what happened in the front. There's a couple major differences. One is this big mess of stuff here that tends to intimidate people. The other is you don't have recessed tabs. You don't have to unscrew, if you have a quick release, you don't have to unscrew that nut. All you have to do is open the quick release lever. Now the wheel will come out of there. I don't have to fool around with adjusting that whole nut system the way that I do with the front. The reason that they don't have that is because if I'm riding down the road and my front wheel comes off for whatever reason, I'm riding across a train track, my wheel bounces up off, so I'm a little bit off the ground, the wheel comes off, I come down on that fork, I'm going to get seriously hurt. They have to have those safety tabs to keep that from happening. On the rear wheel, if for whatever reason this isn't locked down and I'm riding along and this shifts, it's just going to wedge itself in here. You're going to come to a stop, but you're not going to get flung over the handlebars and break your jaw and all that kind of stuff. It's just going to stop you. So you only have to open that. You don't have to fool around with this nut. Make sense? If you have a nutted axle like you folks, we already went over that. If you have a nutted axle on the back, you're just going to loosen the nuts and it's just going to drop off. Okay? Now, this part, I'm going to put this back on so you can, because I only have two hands. But this part, the confusing part, is really not as confusing as it looks. This chain is wrapped around this sprocket assembly and then comes into this derailleur mechanism. It goes over this pulley wheel and under this pulley wheel and then continues on that way. It's not entangled in it. You don't have to disconnect the chain. You don't have to take off. I've seen people take off pulley wheels. I've seen them take derailleurs off in order to take their wheel off. You don't have to do any of that. All you really have to do is shift into the smallest sprocket. On that smallest sprocket in the back. Now I have all kinds of chain to play with here. I don't have to grab the chain when I'm doing this because it's going to be greasy and your hands are going to get all nasty. You don't have to do anything here, but it allows a lot more movement if you're on the smallest sprocket.
You mean like shift into the smallest gear, the
Yep.
lowest
The
gear?
highest
Well,
number.
technically, it's the highest gear. It's the hardest pedaling. The hardest pedaling gear, but it's the smallest sprocket in the back.
Okay, so like this is a 1 through 7 side, and
Do you
this is
have
the,
do you have these push buttons?
yeah.
Okay, so you're just going to pull this until it doesn't pull anymore while you're pedaling, and it's going to drop down to your hardest gear. Okay. If you want to make it even easier, you can shift to the smallest sprocket. Get this all turned around. The smallest sprocket in the front. Smallest sprocket in the front, smallest sprocket in the back. Now I got a lot of chain to play with. Okay? You don't have to on the front, but it just makes it easier.
The
For
smallest
sh-
sprocket is the highest gear?
Depends. The smallest sprocket in the front is the lowest gear. The smallest sprocket in the back is the highest
I
gear.
have a 7-speed, so.
Okay, so on yours, the smallest sprocket is the highest gear.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a
It's confusing, but, so instead of maybe say small sprocket, we'll say high gear, but that would just confuse people.
So
So,
the higher number, the highest number.
yeah, if you have a 7-speed, it
back.
would be, if this was a 7-speed, this would be 7th gear.
So
Okay.
where did you do the 3, like I have the 1, 2, 3 gears on this side and 1 through 7 on this side.
Okay.
Which one do I switch to the
Well-
highest gear? This one?
That one you would switch to 7.
Okay.
Okay? If you have an 8-speed, you'd switch that to 8. If you have a
Okay.
6-speed, switch it to 6. Whatever the biggest number is on the right side, not on the left side. On the left side, it's the smallest number.
Most of the time, the right is
Right
the
is high, left is...
You don't really have to do the front one, but if you're awkward with it, if you struggle with it, it does help to have that extra chain. So once that's in that smallest sprocket, what you'll see is if I pulled up on this, you see how this almost, this isn't really, it's just sitting on top of that sprocket now. The chain is just sitting on top of the sprocket. So if I loosen this, hold my wheel up so it doesn't fall off on me, and pull this back like that, or push this down like that, or whatever. I prefer to put my thumb where the adjusting barrel is. This is adjusting the cable. I prefer to put my thumb here and my fingers here and do this. Everybody good there? Just falls out. If I push this down, it opens it up, and the wheel comes right out. All you're doing is just when you're putting it on, you're just putting that chain on the smallest sprocket. It's just up and off. You don't have to play with the chain. It's just this cage. This is called the cage. So when you push this down, it allows if I leave it up like that, this pulley wheel kind of blocks the slot that I'm trying to put the axle in. But if I pull down on this, see how it comes back? Let me get the wheel out of the way. If I pull this like this, see how that all opens up? If I do that, that's in the way. So if I do this, and I put my sprocket here, it'll just pull itself up just like that. That's all we're doing. In fact, walk over to this bike. This is the easiest way to see it. No wheel in the way. See how this just sits on top? It's not tied into the system at all. It's just sitting on top of the sprocket. So when I take the wheel off, all I'm doing is just dropping that out. And then when I put it back on, I'm just pulling it back on. Does that make sense? Is that easy enough to?
All that gadgetry inside there.
So
Scared.
without the wheel here, it's kind of easier to see what's going on. But that's all it is you're just opening up a space that if I did this, I could just lift this right up off here. It's not attached to the gears at all. Okay? Once you do that, change your tire the same way that we just showed you, and then you go to put it back on. And again, just pull back on this cage. You can do it without even getting greasy because you don't have to touch the chain. You can just touch this little piece right here. Pull that way, put the sprocket on, pop the wheel in. I don't have to play with the nut anymore. I just have to lock this in place and then hook the brake back up. But you have to make sure, again, the same way as the front, that the wheel's all the way up. most bikes today have what they call vertical dropouts. These